Obviously, on the opening day of conference, we do the agendas, we do the rule changes. You have to listen to me a little bit, but we also get the opportunity to have an inspirational, inspiring discussion and talk from our General Secretary too. And it's that time of the day where it's my opportunity to introduce Ronnie to do his opening address to conference. Ronnie Draper, General Secretary.
Thank you. Chair, delegates, comrades and friends. 6 weeks ago, when I was preparing for conference, I envisaged that I was going to be standing before you today, lauding the election that saw the demise of this rotten coalition government and the infancy of a Labour-led coalition, governing a country with all the implications that that could have. Instead, we have a gloating cesspool of Tory MPs only too eager to continue with the programme of austerity against those already severely disadvantaged by 5 years of financial attacks, benefit sanctions and incomprehensible levels of low pay, low skill, low aspiration jobs. A government that is willing to turn a blind eye to the exploitation of migrant labour across the globe and prepared to cosset those who corruptly evade tax with offshore havens or accounting loopholes the size of the rings of Saturn. A government that will change policy on the hoof in its quest to remain in power and to protect the demands of those who prop it up financially. A referendum on Europe to appease UKIP. A serious internal discussion on TTIP to protect their friends who have and continue to seek to privatise such things as our NHS. You know, just after the election, I think it was the day after, the President phoned me and he said, "Hey Ronnie," he said, "you'll never guess," he said, "David Cameron said the Tories are going to be the party of working people." And I said, "Yeah, and Santa Claus really does come down your chimney on the 25th of December. There really is a man in the moon. And if you fall asleep with your head under the pillow, the tooth fairy is going to take all your teeth out." Comrades, clearly Cameron's definition of a party of the people is something totally different to what I see as a party of the people. Does he count the poor as people, or just some sort of subspecies that at the beck and the call of the rich? A group who will carry the financial burden for the mistakes of the banks, a ready-made army of cheap labour to exploit at will. I ask the question, does a party of the people remove fairness from the workplace at a rate that beggars any logical understanding, unless it is a deliberate ploy to hamstring the very people that they say that they're going to protect? They've removed protective health and safety legislation from the workplace, legislation which is supposed to ensure that workers are not injured, maimed or even worse. Legislation that has fallen by the wayside in the name of removing red tape for the employer. Fallen on the bonfire that has the HSE as kindling, fanned by the pages of the Health and Safety at Work Act. Comrades, it doesn't matter to a Tory if you, your family, your friends or colleagues suffer because of the negligence of your employer, so long as that employer has got a few less forms to fill in. They strive to make it more difficult for trade union members to take strike action against their employers, irrespective of how they're treated at work, as they see it as a restriction on business and unfair to the poor employer. What happened to fairness for the employee? Who in the Tory party worries about exploitation of those in the workplace? But of course, we don't have it in our hands to defeat this corrupt anti-worker legislation written by millionaires. Sorry, we do have it in our hands to defeat this corrupt anti-worker legislation written by millionaires, delivered by an unelected billionaire to benefit the rich and the privileged of this country. We defeat it by sticking together, comrades. And I want you to look at the examples of Gunstons recently and of Burton's Lantarnum. who voted in such numbers that it wouldn't have mattered what legislation Sajid Javid had before us, because people in those branches stuck together, and are prepared to take action together. And of course, what government of the people allows for the absolute control of huge swathes of working population by exploitative employers in the way of zero-hour contracts, agency and casualised labour? It's a sham. Self-employed schemes that are there, and a plethora of part-time, low-paid, low-skill positions. You know, the Tories call it flexibility, and they have done since the days of Thatcher. Flexibility. I call it slavery. And when I look at the government proposing to get rid of the Human Rights Act, one of the key cornerstones of that is the abolition of slavery. And yet this government seems to legislate to have people on slave terms, slave conditions and slave wages. Comrades, they have used various guises in their slavery thing. Workfare for one, bedroom tax for another, mansion tax. All these things follow on from when Thatcher also had the poll tax. All things to denigrate working people and to keep them suppressed. Keeping a long dole queue so that they could drive down the wages under Thatcher's. Now they're more subtle. They just go ahead with it and cut terms and conditions and legislate for it. And to top it all, they've virtually eradicated our access to justice. You know, you have to self-refer if you have an accident at work. You can't do it through your union anymore. If you get dismissed, you have to pay to go to a tribunal. And should you lose, even on the smallest technicality, you can face financial destruction for you and for your family. It has to be a bad system, Chair, that sees barristers, who are not of our class, but barristers taken to the cobbles on strike against this government. There has to be something bad in that justice system. You know, I don't necessarily agree with either statement, you know, whether you get the government that you deserve or you get the government that you vote for. Well, I do believe that those at the bottom of the earnings ladder have contributed to the election of the most right-wing government in living memory. If not by their actual support, but by their voting actions or inactions. Millions of working people voted UKIP as an alternative to the Tories without thinking about the consequences of voting for them. A party that's been said on numerous occasions today that is more Tory than the Tories, committed to change in the Euro enforced legislation. That they say that the UK has had to suffer. The legislation that we've had to suffer, comrades, is the working time regulations and stuff like that that has protected us on holidays, that gives us a response back to our bosses. They're the sort of legislation that this government and UKIP would seek to try and get rid of. But while they're doing that and they want to get rid of the six-pack, this is coming from a leader who is anti-Europe, who earns his lavish salary and his lavish expenses in Europe. Although he rarely attends, he's also married to somebody from Europe, but never ever mentions that, and that's left to people of the press at times. A man of the people he's seen as, the ordinary, beer-swilling, fag-smoking guy that you meet down at the pub. Except, as Richard had said before, this guy is a multi-millionaire, privately educated, merchant banker, an ex-card carrying member of the Tory party, who incidentally, and you'll all remember it during the election thing, said that he would vote with the Tories. He was supposed to be against the things that they stood for, but made it very, very clear that that was the party that he was going to get, should he get into Parliament. You know, comrades, clearly people didn't trust the Labour Party to lead the country, despite the promises, the abolition of the bedroom tax, zero-hour contracts, and the development of that mansion tax, and a fairer tax system that would have benefited us all. You know, whether it was the absence of film star good looks on behalf of Ed Miliband, or our abject failure to refute the scurrilous accusations that the economic crash and austerity were all manifestations of the previous Labour government. People fail to embrace them as a credible alternative. You know, unfortunately, there is no credible home for the disenchanted. You know, I don't want to be too controversial, but without counting the SNP who stood on this anti-austerity platform and Plaid Cymru, we had 10 or 11 other parties in that election who professed to be left-wing in some guise or another, all standing different candidates in different parts of the country, and all with laudable manifestos. The problem is that they were not only taking potential votes from Labour, they were also splitting the left vote. I'm not certain, but I don't think that any one of those parties actually saved their deposit anywhere. If we are to have a credible party on the left, then we need to unite behind a banner with common objectives and realistic ambitions. And believe me, if the Labour Party don't do it in the future, I'll be one of the ones who'll be touting for us to look elsewhere. But the fact is that we've got to get the left together. We have to come, otherwise we're going to just be dividing our own class. Above all, as I say, we have to take the working class with us, confident that we can affect change, not just talk about it. Chair, I want to move on, if I can, to the debacle. I know we've had the debate this afternoon in emergency motion 2, but I want to talk just for a short while about the Labour Party leadership campaign. And I think after nearly 40 years as a member of the Labour Party, I believe that I've earned the right to call it a debacle, because that is exactly what it is. You know, when Henry Ford used to sell his cars, he used to give people a choice. He said, you can have any colour you want as long as it's black. And it appears that Labour executive, its leadership, are doing exactly the same thing. It appears to me that the Labour leadership is saying you can choose any Labour leader as long as they're from the right. Mary Cray, Andy Burnham, Liz Kendall and Yvette Cooper, all lovely people, all dedicated Labour people, but not people of the people. And now I'm pleased to say that we have Jeremy Corbyn, at least who's entered the race, who gives us an opportunity of change. It was almost like the White Knight on the charger coming to the rescue of working people. You know, the best recommendation the others gave me was that they made Ed Miliband look something like a lefty. My question would have been, had Jeremy not stood, where is that left candidate? And more importantly, why do we need 35 Labour MPs to support a potential leader? What say do we have as trade unionists? What say do I have as an individual member as to who leads our party, other than the individual vote? We used to have the electoral college. It got scrapped. And it got scrapped because they believed the trade unions had too much influence. It isn't about trade union people having influence. It's about working people having influence who leads our party. You know, I've got to say that as an individual member of that Labour Party, if I'm given the opportunity, I will be voting for Jeremy Corbyn, and I will be going out and campaigning for him as our leader. And I will also be pushing Labour MPs. I was in the Scottish Parliament on Thursday, and I talked to Labour MSPs and tried to canvass their support for Jeremy Corbyn for that leadership. You know, he's a decent guy. It was said before, I think that April said it, anti-austerity, anti-war, worker support, and most certainly a fast food rights advocate. He is honest, he is committed, and he is a dedicated individual. We need to unite the left behind somebody like Jeremy Corbyn. And you know, if he doesn't get those 35 votes, comrades, he will not be able to stand under this present constitution. But I'd ask the question, what special qualifications do Labour MPs have that they can have the exclusive power to nominate leadership candidates on behalf of hundreds of thousands of Labour Party members without redress or without direction. None of you would allow our full-time officials, the paid officials of this union, to elect the two national officers without you having a say. It would be thought about in this, but that's exactly what is happening within the Labour Party. You know, when you voted for your elected Labour MP, presuming you did vote Labour, how many said to you, if you vote for me, it'll be a vote for X as a leader? They talked of manifesto pledges and what they would do to affect change in their constituency, but nobody added the caveat, and I spoke to probably more MPs than anybody else in this room. Nobody ever said to me that if Ed Miliband stands down, you vote for me and you'll be getting Andy Burnham or Liz Kendall's camp. Why would they? When I've been asked, and I've been asked on many occasions by the press, who's the Bakers Union going to be supporting? And I have a stock answer to it. Until now, of course, because now we know who we're supporting. Do you know, it doesn't matter what we think about it, because of the electoral change gone on. I always answer that the press that if it was the Grand National, first of all, I'd want to see who was running it. I'd want to see what form they had before I placed a bet. And I'm most certainly not prepared to tell anyone in the press where I see either my individual allegiance lying within the Labour Party, and more importantly, where I see our organisation's allegiance, until today. And just like the Grand National, if I don't like the runners, I most certainly don't have a bet. You know, even if we were to have one member, one vote, what is wrong with trade unions making their own nomination? Why can't we nominate people like John McDonnell or Ian Lavery, MPs who have a proven track record of tireless work on behalf of a fair deal for their class? And what about the new intake? We listened to Richard Bergen this afternoon, but they're not alone. Louise Haigh or Clive Lewis. Why can't they be leaders? Why can't we nominate those people as leaders of our organisation? I might not say Justin Madders, because if he dances we'll lose forever, we'll be ever out of power. But as I say, now we have Jeremy Corbyn that we can unite behind, and it's important that every one of us goes from here and puts pressure on our local MPs, where there is a Labour MP in your area, to get behind him. I'm not saying that my way or the highway, but I am saying that giving us Hobson's choice is no choice at all for working people. Comrades, we already have an electoral system that determines that every 5 years we have to elect an MP from a list of people we don't know, presented by a committee that we don't know, hoping that they stand for the same aspirations as us. Comrades, it's naff, and it's time to change. Chair, we have a relatively small agenda this year, but every motion means something to somebody in this room. It means something to those people that you represent back at the branch. Every member has an opportunity to have a say. Every branch can shape the way their delegates vote, and every delegate has the right to come to this rostrum to express their opinions. All we ask is that we get the same within the political theatre. Politicians would do well to take a leaf out of the trade union manual. Comrades, you portray democracy at its very best. You are a credit to the movement and those you represent. Don't ever change that. Thank you for listening. Solidarity.